So, good morning to everyone and welcome to the Northants' first ever climate change conference. It is no accident that we have arranged this virtual conference to take place just as the United Nations COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow has come to an end. I'm sure there will be much discussion over the coming weeks and years about what the outcomes of COP26 mean for us all, and more importantly, our planet. However, whatever the post-conference views or analysts say, the fact that nearly 200 countries have made an historic and unprecedented pledge to speed up the end of fossil fuel subsidies and reduce the use of coal is certainly very significant. Despite the pledges and targets, what is clear is the fact that we must all take a lead. We need to be bold and we need to be innovative, and we're probably going to need to be very brave too if we are going to make the changes necessary to rise to this challenge. I believe that Northamptonshire can rise to this challenge, but more than that, it can take a lead. We are already seeing new industries in green technology emerge within Northants, and it would be great to see them thrive. We need more sustainable transport, more renewable energy production, and we need improved approaches to the management of local environmental and complex ecosystems. So look, here's the deal. This will not only be better for the planet, it's better for us. A better environment is nicer to live in, nicer to work in, and certainly better to relax in too. And cleaner air is better for all our health and well-being. So responding to climate change does not have to be a chore. It's a new way of thinking, and it's a new way of living. Now, on this note, I am delighted to welcome an exciting lineup of speakers today at our virtual conference. All speakers represent organisations that are either situated locally or doing some great innovative work within our local area. All are contributing to a bold ambition for the future to help reduce humanity's negative impact upon our beautiful planet. So before I hand over and we get this conference moving, I would like to make one last point. The challenge of climate change is too important to ignore. We have to act, and we need to act today. It cannot be put off till tomorrow. If we do not work to sort this problem out, then the planet is going to respond in its own way. And that'll be a way that will not be too kind to life on Earth. But there is time still, if we act now and if we act quickly. So without further ado, I am delighted to hand over to Councillor Harriet Pentland, our Executive Member for Climate and the Green Environment. Thank you.
Thank you. As you just heard, I'm Councillor Harriet Pentland and I'm the Executive Member for Climate and the Green Environment on Northamptonshire Council, an executive role that covers incredibly important work in terms of our response to climate change and looking after the environment locally. I'd like to quickly reiterate those remarks and thank everybody who's involved today for their participation. It's really important to me that local people know what's going on locally in respect of climate change, and I hope that today will be really interesting. Over the last 2 weeks, news and commentary from the COP26 conference in Glasgow has been front and centre of television, papers, radio, and day-to-day conversations, as thousands of delegates from countries across the world have sought to make agreements to tackle climate change and stop us heading further in the wrong direction. The key goals heading into COP26 were to keep 1.5 degrees alive, as we've often heard the Prime Minister say, adapt to protect communities already experiencing the effects of climate change, mobilise finance, and very importantly, work together to deliver. After a tense few hours of final negotiations, on Saturday night, an agreement was reached between almost 200 countries. This agreement has seen the completion of the Paris Rulebook, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change and will provide checks on whether countries are sticking to their agreements. In an historic first, the phasing down of coal was also part of the agreement, wording which many had hoped would be stronger, and as the president of COP26, Alok Sharma MP said, China and India would have to explain themselves to island nations in relation to this. So what should we make of the last 2 weeks, which are crucial in our planet's future? Well, it's clear to me that the public, and indeed those at the negotiations rightly want to see meaningful action. And I think this was reflected in the levels of engagement from countries across the world and indeed people from across the world. The Prime Minister said in a press conference on Sunday that he was genuinely more optimistic, but that the fatal mistake now would be to think that we've cracked climate change. These are sentiments I agree with. Progress has been made, and this must now be made through action in a way that we've not seen before, otherwise we risk unthinkable consequences. There's still lots to unpack from the last 2 weeks, with hundreds of documents to analyse on the United Nations webpage on climate change. And locally, we've got to play our part too, something we're committed to at North Northamptonshire Council. I also hope that local government across the world will be recognised for its role and also recognise the role it has to play in our response to climate change. Speaking of which, we hope that by bringing together individuals from across North Northamptonshire leading on the green agenda, we'll give you an insight into the work going on your doorstep and the opportunities moving forward at this crucial point in time. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to the first speaker, which is Dr. Chris Holt, who is from the University of Northampton, and he's going to talk to us about our future climate. Thank you.
Right, well, good morning. I think there should be a slide coming up as well. Let me just check with the organisers. So is the slide show up and running? Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm Chris Holt. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Northampton, and I've been asked to talk to you about basically the future climate. So what is it going to mean for us, both within the UK, but also within Northamptonshire as well? The COP26 has been very exciting. There have been some very interesting things going on at the conference. There have also been some rather disappointing results coming out of it as well. What I want to do is to begin by putting things into context. What we have here is a rather unusual view of the Earth. We're looking down onto the North Pole, the Arctic, and just towards the, I suppose, the left-hand side, you can just make out the British Isles. At COP26, they were talking about how important it was to reduce warming to about 1.5 degrees. To put that into context, this year, 2021, is likely to be somewhere between 0.9 and 1.1 degree warmer than the pre-industrial temperature. So we're already heading towards that 1.5 degrees. In terms of where 2021 sits, actually, we're looking at potentially the 7th year in succession where temperatures have actually been close to or above 1 degree above pre-industrial levels. So we are looking at quite a significant degree of warming already. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, please don't be too disheartened by this diagram. This essentially is the greenhouse effect. This is the global heat balance. What comes into the planet in terms of energy from the sun, and then what escapes. Now, if we want to have a stable climate, we need to make sure that what is able to escape through the climate, through the atmosphere in terms of infrared radiation, the so-called greenhouse, basically balances what comes in. Now, at the moment, we have much more greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere, and this is essentially muddying the window. It's preventing more of the infrared radiation escaping out into space, and therefore we're starting to see the atmosphere beginning to warm up. And in fact, it has been warming up really for the last 100 or so years. 1.5 is the threshold temperature above which things become more problematic. It is possible that we may actually see global temperatures rising by 2 degrees. Certainly by the end of the century, and potentially even 4 degrees. So there is a lot we need to be aware of. We need to be thinking about, well, what are the implications for us? Now, when we talk about 1.5, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, what are we actually talking about? I mean, 1.5 degrees is a temperature that you would probably not even register if the room temperature went up by that amount. You wouldn't be able to detect it. 1.5 degrees is a global average temperature rise. So across the globe, 1.5 degrees is actually quite significant. The other thing that with an average is that essentially what we're dealing with here is there are going to be some parts of the globe that are going to be warming up much higher. And if we look at the polar regions, you're looking at temperatures for a global rise of about 1.5. In the polar regions, you're probably looking at about 8 degrees worth of warming. In the UK, we're looking at a little bit less than that. So it is still quite a significant impact on the UK. So can I have the next slide, please? Now, what this shows you is the CO2 levels measured in Mauna Loa, on the Hawaiian island chains right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And we've been measuring, or the scientists have been measuring CO2 levels basically since the 1960s, 1950s. We have climate records and atmospheric gas records going back certainly to earlier on in the century. So we're able to show that things are going up. And you can see that year on year, basically since the 1960s, CO2 has gone up. The slight rise and fall in the graph is actually quite interesting. What you can see there is the effect of seasons. As we move into the winter in the Northern Hemisphere, you actually find a slight, very, very small increase in global CO2 levels. And then as we move into summer, the CO2 levels start to fall. Can you click on the button? So in terms of the current CO2 levels, as of the 8th of November, they were at 414 parts per million. Now, to put that into context, if we go back to before the Industrial Revolution started, you're looking at about 250 parts per million. And a vast majority of this increase in CO2 has basically taken place in the last 50 years. So we've seen a marked increase in CO2 levels within a relatively short space of time. And this is unusual from a global context. So things are certainly changing. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, what this graph shows you is the global temperature anomaly from 1880 right through to the present day. And at the moment, if we consider, for example, 2020, when we have the last major set of data, so a complete set of data, we've actually got 2020 as tied as the warmest year on record. If you look carefully, you'll see that basically since the 1980s, global temperatures have been warmer than average in basically every single year. We've actually got two phases of warming here. We have a period of warming up to the 1940s, then we have a period of cooling, and then from the 1980s onwards, we get this very significant warming taking place. So what does it mean for the UK? What does it mean? Why does it matter? So can I have the next slide, please? So if we consider 1.5 degrees worth of global warming, so what? Why does it matter? What impact is it going to have? What we need to think about is what has happened over the last couple of decades. We are already seeing the initial impact of climate change. It's not something that's going to happen 50, 100 years' time. It's happening now. If we look at the 10 warmest years on record within the UK, every single one of those have occurred since 2002. If you think about the heat waves that we had in, for example, 2018 and 2019, these are now much more frequent. In fact, 30 times more likely to occur because of already existing climate change. Where we are in the UK, you can see that basically we are experiencing already something in the region of a 1 degree warming compared to 1961 to 1990. So we're seeing that warming pattern occurring. Can I have the next one, please? In terms of rainfall, what's actually going on? Well, it's getting wetter. So on one hand, we are looking at warmer temperatures, so hotter temperatures as well. We're also looking at more rain. But this actually hides part of what's really going on. There are some very unusual, very interesting things, very problematic things that are happening to our climate, not just within the UK, but also within Northamptonshire. So looking forward, what we're probably looking at is, okay, how will our winters be in 50 years' time? Well, essentially, they're going to get warmer. They're also going to get wetter. But that doesn't mean we won't have colder and drier winters. So that they will still probably occur, but very, very infrequent. They'll become the unusual things. In terms of summer, they're going to get much hotter and also much drier. But we may have an issue of very high intensity rainfall. So can I have the next slide, please? Now, what this shows you is how temperatures for the UK will change probably by between 2061 and 2080. You can see that there are 3 different maps based on the lowest. So that is what will happen if we get things right, if we start reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One thing to remind everyone of is, yes, we can stop CO2 emissions today, we can stop greenhouse gas emissions. That will not stop climate change. What we are seeing is gases in the atmosphere that are very long-lived. So carbon dioxide, methane, and so on. These will exist in the atmosphere for about 100 years before they start being removed from the atmosphere. So essentially, changes that we make today will have a big impact, but not immediately. So we need to make those changes now. So as far as temperatures are concerned, we are looking at certainly much warmer temperatures over the year. Can I have the next slide? Now, when we deal with warmer temperatures, okay, a couple of degrees warmer, potentially 4 degrees warmer in the summers. But those aren't the things that tend to cause the problems. Can I have the next clip, please? So if we look at hottest days, now this is where people start to struggle. This is where you lose sleep at night. This is where it becomes uncomfortable. Now, at the moment, the hottest temperatures recorded in the UK in this area, you're looking at about 28, although so we had Cambridge recording almost 39 degrees a couple of years ago. So hotter temperatures at night, problematic. Next clip. If we get 2 degrees of warming, then we're looking at the highest temperatures rising a little bit further. And the next one, please. And you can see that if we ever do reach 4 degrees, then we're looking at temperatures in the UK, certainly within Northamptonshire, possibly exceeding 40 degrees. Now that is a very unpleasant temperature. Where we tend to get the biggest problems with high temperature days, it tends to be where we don't have much of a cooling at night. So it's those very hot summer days with very muggy, very warm summer nights that make life very difficult. And this is also a significant threat to human health in terms of heat-related mortality. Can I have the next one, please? If we look at the other half of the year, so winter months, then we tend to find that basically where we are in the UK, our winters tend to be not too extreme, but we do get some very extreme warm temperatures. So the warmest temperature, for example, in winter in the Northamptonshire, look about 18 degrees. Next one, please. 2 degrees of warming pushes that still higher, and the next one. And if we go to 4 degrees of warming, then higher still. Now, this again is problematic. If we take the highest temperatures, certainly in the summer, then you only need to think about the impact that has on our roads. Basically, tarmac starts to melt. Railways, the rail network starts to fail basically as the train tracks start to buckle under the heat. In terms of winter, okay, milder winters, fantastic. Perhaps we need to use less energy for heating, but it's not that straightforward. If we think about things like pests and diseases in the climate or in the neighbourhood, these are less likely to be affected by much milder winters. Also, if we think about fruiting of things like apples, many of our fruit trees actually require a period of senescence. So basically, when temperatures drop below a certain point, generally close to freezing, that provides the key for these trees to then fruit the following year. So warmer temperatures all the year round are not ideal. Can I have the next slide, please? In terms of precipitation, we have 2 possibilities here. So we have, again, the summer months. Summers are likely to get drier. Now, this has implications for things like drought. So potentially we will be needing to use more water from our reservoirs, from our groundwater, take more water out of the rivers. And again, that has a significant environmental impact. But the summer situation is, again, complicated. Potentially, we're looking at fewer rainy days during the summer months. But this hides something else. This hides the sting in the tail. Although we may have fewer days when it rains in the summer, which I'm sure everybody will appreciate, we'll be looking potentially at higher intensity rainfall events. So essentially, the sort of rainfall events that lead to things like flash floods. So potentially drought in the summer, very dry conditions, but again, these very high intensity rainfall events that lead to localized flooding. Can I have the next slide, please? Regarding winter, then basically it is going to get wetter. So for the winter months, you're probably looking at about 30 degrees more rain, or 30% more rain, with a warming of anywhere between 1 and 4.5 degrees. Summer, you're looking about 60% drier. So again, in terms of, well, what are the implications? A wetter winter means potentially, again, more winter flooding. We only need to think back to the floods that affected parts of Northamptonshire in 1998, which caused significant devastation to the local area. And also, we must not forget loss of life as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, what this shows you is the rain days. So in terms of how many days it will rain, surprisingly on the eastern side of the country, we're actually protected from a lot of the major rainfall that comes in from the Atlantic. But what we will be seeing as we move into the summer are fewer days when it actually rains. Winter basically does something very similar, but we have more rain days in the winter anyway. Can I have the next slide, please? To put this into perspective, even this year, we have seen significant impacts around the world. Northern Germany, we had those significant flash floods in July that were completely unexpected, caused tremendous damage within a very, very short space of time. Round about the same time, flash floods in London, again caused by a similar high intensity rainfall. If we move further south in Europe, the situation in Greece, where temperatures for the first time ever, and again in parts of Spain, reaching 50 degrees Celsius. And again, these are now starting to become the norm. These are not the things that our households are designed to cope with. If you think about how easy it is to cool properties down on a hot summer's day or even a hot summer's night, our buildings are not designed for this. So we do have a lot of challenges facing us. I think there is a lot of potential for what we can start doing to basically make our lives a lot more comfortable. Right at the start, it was good to hear that basically people are talking about carrots rather than sticks. What is in it for us? I think basically a good night's sleep on a hot summer's day is worth its weight in gold. So can I have the final slide, please? At Northampton, sorry for the plug, we are very interested, very keen, very passionate about the whole issue of climate change and what its impacts are. And if you are interested, we actually do have a brand new degree on climate change that is recruiting at the moment for a start in September of next year. So thank you very much, and hopefully I haven't lost anybody with what I've covered today.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, for that. That was really interesting. And I think a lot of time on the news, we hear about the weather impacts and the impacts of climate change on countries around the world. But it's really interesting to hear about the effect locally and bring it right down to the scale of Northamptonshire. We're certainly going to see changes that we don't want to see if we keep going in the direction we are. And we've already seen the impacts of that with flooding locally in North Northamptonshire last year that devastated people's lives for many months. And that's certainly not something we want to continue seeing in greater scales as we move forward. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now going to hand over to Nick Bolton from Electric Corby, and he is going to be talking to us about our 3D energy future. So over to you, Nick.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My video doesn't seem to be coming on, but that's fine because can I give my first apology of the morning, which is I'm stranded between work and home, which sounds a bit of a analogy for the last couple of years, really, isn't it? But I've had to stop and make sure I got service connection so I can join you this morning. So apologies if there's any background noise. But happy to make a start. And if I can't see the slides coming up yet, are they on their way? Here we go. Great. So good morning. My name is Nick Bolton, as Harriet introduced me. Thank you. I'm the co-founder of Electric Corby. I'll tell you a little bit more about Electric Corby later on in the presentation, particularly as we focus down on what's happening in the North Northamptonshire area and what's been going on for the last number of years and what can be going on in the future. But I'm here really just to give you a flavour and a feel for how energy is playing a key part in our decarbonisation and our net zero future. So, title of my conversation is our 3D energy future. So, if you move on to the next slide, please. I'm sort of getting straight to the punchline. What do I mean by a 3D future? Really, it's about delivering a net zero energy system that's decarbonised, the first of the Ds, and the key one for this conversation, decentralised and digitised to support a just transition. And in fact, that final line about a just transition could make it a 4D, a four-dimensional diagram, but I couldn't find a four-dimensional diagram to show you, which is democratisation, and that's a key part of what this transition can potentially offer us as well. Can move on to the next slide, please. But I think it's really key that when we're taking a 3D look at this, I'm talking about a wide-angle view, looking at a whole system perspective, but also a high precision focus, because those two ends of the spectrum are really important to how energy is transitioning and is going to transition over the next decade as we head towards a net zero targets. Next slide, please. So many people, if they know anything about the energy system or have a perception of it, will think about large centralized power stations up and down the country, generating our power and distributing it out. And next slide, please. And the wires really that take it to our homes, the distribution network, national grid, bringing the large amounts of power across from where the power stations are to our local towns and villages. And then the distribution network, which takes it to the next level down, the local network that brings it directly to our doors and to our businesses. And really that's the bit that's transitioning, particularly at the moment, going through a great deal of change. And if we can go to the next slide, please, where we're seeing a real disaggregation, local generation being a key driver to this. We're seeing many people have seen solar farms around. Many people now have solar on their roofs, and we're seeing that decentralization of and decarbonisation, importantly, of where our energy comes from. The UK has shifted almost exclusively, almost completely, I should say, away from coal now. Hot topic at COP over the last couple of weeks, obviously. We very, very occasionally have to fire up a coal fire station at the moment, but it's almost, it makes headline news when we do it. It's that rare now, which is a fantastic transition for the UK. Wind playing a significant part of that, and offshore wind playing a particular part of that. So that still feels a little bit like centralized generation, but a lot of it now, and the important bit that's affecting how our system is working and going to work and going to be more and more decarbonized in future, is that decentralized nature of where the energy is generated, but also how we make use of storage to manage the fact that we have this intermittent renewable generation from solar and wind, and combining that with more traditional generation. Yeah, okay, that's fine. More traditional generation at base stations and gas-fired power stations. So we are in that transition now to that local generation. We're also seeing a significant transition that's starting to happen now, but only at a very small level, but is really starting to hit the headlines and going to become a major factor over the next 5 to 10 years, which is the electrification of our homes. So a transition away from gas-fired heating in our homes to an all-electric solution, whether that's heat pumps or other means of heating our homes. That transition is starting to happen in new build and will be mandated in new build from 2024 and 2025, with it starting to happen in 2023. We're obviously also aware that we've got this transition in our transportation. So electric vehicles, again, mandated. All new cars from 2030 will have to be electric in some form, or hybrid electric. No more pure internal combustion engine cars. That has an effect on the vehicles that we buy, but importantly, it has an effect on the energy system. We're transferring our requirement for energy from petrol stations and filling stations to our homes and our businesses and to electricity, and that can have and will have, and is starting already to have, a significant impact on how we manage our energy, and meaning that we have to manage it at a much more decentralized level again. To give you an indication, a typical home in the UK at the moment, the network assumes that on average across a housing estate, those homes use about 2 kilowatts of electricity. As soon as you bring an electric vehicle into the equation or a heat pump, there is the potential for any one time for that home local level consumption to jump from 2 to 10 to even 15 kilowatts. And when the network starts to look at what the average effect of that is with their to their network, they're assuming it's going to have a 7, 8, or 9 kilowatt general impact, and that's a a quadrupling of the capacity requirements at a local level, and that has to be managed. We're also starting to see, and one of our speakers later will talk more, I'm sure, about hydrogen and the potential for its application. There is a range of places where it's starting to emerge, and over the next few decades will find its place in our energy network, whether that's at a home level, in larger vehicles, potentially for in our cars. Although the jury's out of whether that's really going to impact over the next 10 or 20 years or 30 years, but certainly hydrogen will play its part in the transition that we're all going to be facing. So, wait a second. So I think the key bit with that message though as well is while hydrogen has a role to play, it's not the only. It's not going to be the major solution, but electricity is going to be a major part, whether that's fully hybrid, battery electric, whether that's going to be fuel cell electric, which involves hydrogen. Really, all of these things are going to need to happen. The reality is no one of those solutions is going to be the answer. We're going to need a whole range of solutions in our vehicles, and the same is true in our homes. Heat pumps may play and will play a significant part for many homes, and as a retrofit for existing homes, they will play a key part. But there will be other solutions as well, and I think what we'll find is a whole host of solutions coming forward. We need all of them to support the transition to a net zero, not waiting for the one answer that's going to resolve all of our problems in all scenarios. So what's really important, can I just go back to the previous slide for a moment? Is that okay? Because I think that helps illustrate what's going to need to happen is where the digitized element comes in, because what we've got is a range of complex scenarios of energy generation, energy demand, happening at a home level. It's going to be literally on our doorsteps, on our roofs, on our driveways, and in the local community. That's where the energy transition is going to be felt the most in many respects, and where it's going to need to be managed the most if we're going to be able to cope with this transition away from centralized fossil fuel based power stations. And so what's needed at that local level is a mechanism for managing that, being aware of what power is needed for electric vehicles at a given moment, what's needed for in the home, and taking away from the peak demands. I mean, everybody's probably familiar with the classic FA Cup final halftime kettle switching moment, or at the end of EastEnders, and when everybody moves to switch the kettle on in the evening and turn the cooker on. Those sorts of impacts are going to be trebled or quadrupled if you take into account people coming home and the heat pump switching on or their electric vehicle going in, and how that's managed with energy storage and peak time generation during the day of solar energy, or peak time nighttime wind generation of wind, which is when it tends to be most active. How that's managed requires granular management of those energy flows. And that's really where the digitization comes in, and where everybody either actively or passively will be playing a role as they have smart meters installed in their homes, or as they have home energy management systems through controlling when they want to charge their electric vehicle or when they want to heat their home. That digitization and that data flows is going to be really key to how we manage this transition. The first place that's being felt most now is in new build development and new homes development, and obviously North Northamptonshire is a significant growth area. It's at the centre of a lot of the growth that's happening across the UK, fastest growth towns, 2 or 3 of the fastest growth towns in the country, close to 35,000 homes earmarked in the strategic plans over the next few decades. And many of these requirements for infrastructure changes and decentralization are needing to be embedded into those new developments. Developers are just starting to get their head around that, which is really important, because as I say, in a few years' time they won't be able to install gas into homes, so it's really important that they do grasp that. But I think that's a big bit of work that North Northamptonshire in particular is at the forefront of, and needs to keep pushing on to ensure that North Northamptonshire is that leading edge of new house development. If we can move back, if we may, to the last slide, and I think maybe even move on to the next one. So yeah, I mean, I've talked about homes and how this is affecting us individually at our home level. It's also affecting businesses. There's a huge opportunity for commercial businesses, industrial and commercial, to grasp the opportunity around decentralized energy. We have a great many very large warehouses and industrial buildings across the North Northamptonshire area. Very few of them to date have solar on board. Lots of complex reasons that I won't go into about why that hasn't happened to date. There is definitely a shift in how that might happen into the future, and the potential for retrofitting onto those buildings, but offers a real opportunity for the area to increase its decentralized energy generation, and then look at how we manage that to boost economic growth by attracting businesses that are either keen to have renewable energy or just generally have an energy demand that the area can't otherwise cope with. We'll move on to the next slide. But there is also a challenge that we face as well. How do we cope with this transition to electric vehicles? We need to be conscious that this isn't all about new build and clean sheets. There's a great many people that are going to be challenged with how they access electric vehicle charging, for example. This is clearly a case where it's not going to work particularly sustainably, and we need to find better alternative solutions. And again, new build, if we move on to the next slide, new build represents an opportunity to do this in areas where hubs can be created that allow people to do charging overnight away from their home, when in an area proximate to their home, but also offers other services and acts as the central hub for some of that decentralized energy management. This is something that can be done and is being looked at in new build developments. It's more challenging in existing residential areas. And again, I know one of the speakers later is going to be talking a little bit about how that can be potentially addressed. There is still a potential within existing communities to create hubs that allow people access to the charging that they're going to need. But again, it's about how that's managed locally, and we need to be looking at a holistic view across the whole energy network and the whole of our area to see how we can maximize the potential to encourage people to transition and support that transition in a way that's sustainable for the energy system. We'll move on to the next slide, because I think the next two illustrate really just an illustration of how that might come together as community hubs. And again, the next slide. And I know we've got a speaker talking about micro mobility and e-mobility. Again, this is an area where energy generation, albeit in micro amounts, will be required through the electricity network, whether that's e-bikes, e-scooters, shared electric vehicles solutions. They're all going to put existing additional demands on the energy network, but they also represent a huge opportunity to manage that. We can manage peak generation by offloading that excess energy that we've got during the day into electric vehicles, into bikes, into scooters, into buses and other vehicles that are using it when it's being generated, if they're plugged in and not being used. So they act as a buffer for how we maximize that generation locally, rather than having to stress the national network by the network having to find a home for that energy when we're not necessarily using it. So utilizing that in a joined up way is really, really important. Otherwise, we're going to end up with the need for large scale batteries everywhere, which require accommodating and is a cost, when if we manage it more smartly, in a digital way using the assets that are increasingly on the ground, we can have a much more holistic impact on how we manage that energy. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is really just back to the 3D really. So the important bit, the message that I wanted to get across in this is there's lots of individual actions and activities starting to happen on the ground, but it's really important that as an area we continue to take an overall view in all dimensions of how this is affecting our area, and that it presents loads of opportunities as well as some of the challenges I've highlighted. It represents a massive opportunity for us to really democratize the energy system, but manage it really to our economic advantage as well. So if we're able to generate more of our energy locally and manage it locally, we can be a sort of attractive area for new jobs and new skills by offering a future focused energy solution area, as opposed to one that's struggling to maintain energy supplies to new businesses that are moving into the area, or just simply not grasping the transition to a renewable future. So I think that's our great opportunity as a local area. Next slide, please. So just I'll quickly flash up who we are and what we're about, because that will transition into maybe what we're involved in and how the area is already starting to take on some of these challenges and opportunities that I've mentioned. We're a community interest company. We've been involved in a huge number of projects over the last 10 years or so around smart, sustainable energy generation, transport solutions, really looking at how these can be applied on the ground, finding out where the challenges are, learning some mistakes along the way, inevitably, on where we think the pressure points are going to be. And that's been a really useful background for us. Next slide, please. So Flex Unity is a classic one, where we've been looking about how flexible grids can really work in a mixed community. So this is a project that's looking at both residential and commercial energy generation and storage, and how the grid can manage those challenges to the benefit of each of those parties, whether it's the residents or the businesses or the network as well. Next slide, please. Again, looking at how transport plays into this as well. So we've done a project around fleet EV management. This is around how people connect with, utilize electric vehicles in a way that's still provides them with all of the utility and the amenity that they need in service terms. So they get the cars when they want them, they've got their delivery vehicles when they need them and when they want them, but with the right amount of charge in them if they're electric vehicles, without having an undue impact on the grid network. So again, next slide, please. And we've looked at a home level. So this is in Corby, a project looking at individual homes that are generating more energy than they're actually using at a given point in time. They have battery storage, heat storage in them. That has represented a huge challenge as well with the network, which wasn't originally designed to cope with this sort of home development. So a great deal of work and learning has come out of this project in terms of how that needs to be and can be integrated into energy networks. So this is, again, good learning on our doorstep that we can leverage into new communities. Next slide, please. Couple of other projects, and I know Simon's on in a moment, so I'll definitely not talk too much about his project. So, but obviously two areas where there's large scale energy generation at a local level. So decentralized still, it's not, but still at a large scale that can have a significant impact potentially for our region, and allow us to have renewable generation that we can tap into for our local businesses and communities. Next slide, please. And so this is looking to the future. We've now got had the opportunity to bid into and be awarded grant support to look at North Northamptonshire to net zero, looking into the future. A piece of short-term work over the next few months. It's been slightly extended to June because the government's decision was a little bit delayed in telling us that we can progress with this. But it's really an opportunity to identify where the low carbon projects are, where the initiatives are across the North Northampton area. Importantly, then spotting the gaps that exist within that as well, but then really taking a strategic overview, testing the feasibility of all of those projects and see where the dots can be joined up and allow for a strategic alignment, both to help those projects progress and support those projects in progressing, but importantly also look to the next wave of government and private sector funding and investment that's going to be coming over the next year or two, and make sure that North Northamptonshire can be well placed to capture that and progress the projects that it wants to do. So addressing low carbon transport, sustainable housing and renewable energy in all of that, and looking at the same time as how that can support locally generated jobs to support the growth that's going on. So that's not quite launched yet. We've had the announcement that the funding has come to allow us to progress with that work in collaboration with North Northamptonshire Council and with a number of experts that are going to be supporting that work over the next few months. But we're at the point now when we're ready to ask for people to start to tell us about their projects. Literally, this email went live yesterday, so if anybody has got any projects or they want to nudge other people to tell us about projects, then you can email projects@nn2nz.co.uk and let us know about that, and we can start that work. Keen to get moving. Final couple of slides. We're also as an organisation ourselves. Oh, sorry. So some of the opportunities that represented. We've got a huge amount of employment opportunity in the energy network. I've talked a lot about that transition that's going on, and that means there's a huge amount of demand for new skills and new people in the energy network. I think this was identified a year ago when we put that previous project together. 200,000 people required in the UK's energy systems network, and many of those could be in North Northamptonshire. That skills requirements, upgrade how we can support through our education system. We need to be looking at where part of the project work that we'd be looking for is how can we be embedding this early stages in our school system. I think really that list there speaks for itself. I was just going to pop on to the last slide because I'm conscious of time and I'm slightly overrunning. So I've explained who we are and where we've come from. Really, we're definitely about. We were originally about establishing Corby, and I'll come on to that in a moment, as a demonstration location for future sustainable living and working, and we've been doing that for some time. But it's about developing and promoting projects that achieve and enhance economic growth and benefit the community. If I can move on to the last two slides, it'll explain where we're going from in our own transition. So we have been electric Corby for the last 10 years, working specifically in that area and nudging out into North Northamptonshire. Final slide. Very subtle transition you may notice there from electric Corby to electric places, and we're about now accelerating that transition that we've been working towards and trying to do that across the wider county area but beyond as well. So keen to be getting on with that work. A lot to be done and a lot of opportunity for the area to push forward with, and that's my slides, Harriet.
Thank you, Nick. That was really interesting, and it's fantastic to hear about the work that's going on locally in a really tangible sense, and to hear the opportunities for the future. It's really interesting to hear about the North Northants to Net Zero, which received community renewal funding very recently. So it'll be great to see how that develops out locally, so that North Northamptonshire can be at the forefront of the work we're doing. It was also really interesting to learn more about the decentralisation of our energy infrastructure and the large task that goes with that in terms of making sure that houses and business places have enough electricity to be able to meet their needs. And it highlights again the impact locally, that decentralisation, bringing the energy production back to a local, our locality, basically. And there's interesting questions there that come to my mind about energy security and the impact that decentralisation has on all of that. It's also really good to hear about the jobs and skills that we'll be able to bring locally, which are always very important. So thank you again, Nick. That was really interesting, which I think the word interesting is going to be a theme of the day, and that's quite right, because it is. So I'm now going to hand over to Simon Toseland, who is from Chelveston Renewable Energy and Innovation Park, who's going to talk to us about this site. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Councillor Pentland. I assume you can hear me, although yeah. I can't see anything on the screen yet. So I'm Simon Toseland. I'm a Director of Commercial Property Consultants, Prop Search, based in Northamptonshire, covering the Midlands region. We are the advisors and promoters of Chelveston Renewable Energy and Innovation Park, which we believe to be the largest combined renewable energies park in the UK. I'm now going to run a short video for you to watch, and following that video, I'll then review details of this project. So if you can run the video, please. Thanks for that. You maybe didn't have the music in the background, which was would have made it a little more interesting, but nevertheless, I hope you got a good idea of exactly an overview of what we're doing at Chelveston. So actually, this one of Nick's comments about flex unity and the role of energy parks in terms of serving both the residential and the commercial markets is exactly what Chelveston is doing. This is a 750-acre site that was acquired 15 years ago. It's currently, we've invested close to £100 million on site. It provides for 9 2.85 megawatt turbines, which have an installed capacity of 25.6 megawatts. We have a rollout of 500,000 solar panels on site. We have an initial 330,000 installed already with an 80 megawatt capacity, and another 160,000 going in by the end of 2023, which will take the total solar energy generated on site to 120 megawatts. The site will have the capability of generating up to 185 gigawatt hours of renewable energy. We've got 2 grid connections, an 80 megawatt export and a 26 megawatt import. In November last year, we obtained planning permission from Northampton Council to develop an innovation and science park on site with a direct wire feed from the energy park. So all the buildings that are constructed on site will have a direct wire feed for power generated from the renewable energy park. This not only provides 100% renewable energy solutions, but also quite a topic at the moment at a figure significantly lower than grid retail price. So a major benefit for those occupiers on site, both in terms of renewable solutions, but also a financial solution. We've developed various technologies on the park over the last few years, and we continue to do so. And we're working with the ARC, Cranfield University, SEMLEP, and in dialogue with the DIT, BAYES, the DFT, and others. So we have a good network of partners that we're working with now in the development of technologies, but also in the promotion and identifying potential occupiers for the scheme. We are currently constructing a new solar array for the production of hydrogen, a dedicated solar array for the production of green hydrogen. We have consent for a 10 megawatt electrolyzer on site that will have the ability to generate around 1 ton of hydrogen a day. To give you an idea, a ton of hydrogen today with a hybrid diesel hydrogen engine would be enough to power roughly 100 lorries a day. So we've installed an initial electrolyzer on site using the first phase of solar array that's now generating around 10 kilos a day. If I can go on to the slide 2, please, if that's possible. There we go. So that's a view of the HGV that we have currently got on site. You can see that the black tank, the black tank the mark is on now is the hydrogen tank. Obviously, the hydrogen feed coming into the left-hand side to the truck, and then the picture to the right-hand side shows you a close-up of that hydrogen fuel going into the engine. We can go on to the next slide, please. And there's a view of the truck that we have. This truck is now running in trials from Chelveston, and we're monitoring all of the data from the hybrid diesel engine to help us understand the role of hydrogen within an internal combustion engine and how we can gradually increase the amount of hydrogen that we use within the mixture. We're running at about 30% hydrogen on this truck at the moment. We're aiming to get to 40% within the medium short term. Clearly, if you're running a fleet of lorries, then if you've got 30% hydrogen in one lorry, then that effectively equates to 1 in 3 lorries being 100% hydrogen. There are costs associated with using hydrogen, which have, given the cost of energy has recently risen. Those costs have come down from maybe 3 times the cost of gas and diesel down to 2 times the cost. So there are things to address in terms of the use of hydrogen, in terms of it making it commercial. But clearly, we're making good strides in moving forwards with the integration of hydrogen generated on site within our HGV fleets. Chelveston currently has consent for a 47 megawatt peak lopping plant. That's effectively a power station. And this will use gas hydrogen hybrid internal combustion engines. Clearly, there's a lot of talk about renewables and a lot of talk about carbon zero and a lot of talk about negativity of fossil fuels. But the reality is that fossil fuels are obviously have to play a role in the transition into a carbon neutral future. We can't just switch straight as we are now without the use of fossil fuels to get us there. And these engines that will be installed on site are there to provide energy when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. Clearly, if you're going to build an innovation park with occupiers in industry within those buildings, you need to guarantee the power supply to them. And the peak lopping plants will play a role in that guarantee provision and will gradually increase the amount of hydrogen they use that's generated on site as the technology evolves. We've also moved forwards in the use of batteries for energy storage. Clearly, solar energy isn't available to us at night, and therefore we need a way of storing that energy that we create during the day. If there's excess energy, we can store that and use that at night, or we use it at 4 o'clock on a November afternoon, like today, when it'll be dark and there won't be any solar energy generated. So we're using solar panels where we're generating energy. All solar panels generate energy in DC. Up till now, the majority of installations will convert that, they'll invert that energy to AC to be used. We're keeping it in DC and feeding it straight into batteries. which saves about 5% through the inversion process, which may not seem like a lot, but when you're generating 120 megawatts, 5% loss through inversion is a significant amount of power to lose. We have a 20 megawatt battery facility under construction, and we've reached an exclusive agreement with a global car manufacturer to take their second life batteries from them. So when a car battery gets to roughly 80% of its performance life, it becomes less effective in a vehicle and needs to come out of it. Clearly, something needs to be done with these batteries. And we've found a way of utilizing second life batteries in energy storage. Batteries in cars, depending on who's driving them, have different lives. Either a hard life, being zapped around the countryside and charged really quickly, or a fairly relaxed life, being used not very often and just trundling down to the supermarket once a week. The problem with that is when you come to chain the batteries together, they all have different performances in terms of discharge and recharge rates. So it's called frequency response, and it means that they're less usable in terms of chaining. So we've developed software and technologies that allow to charge and discharge these batteries uniformly, which means they can now be used in energy storage on the park. And we will be rolling these batteries out over the next year, 18 months. This is the first development using this technology, and we'll be using on site the batteries for both commercial, and I'm going to talk to you later on about some residential development we're undertaking where we'll use those batteries in that. If we can move on to slide 4, please. So this is a view of the innovation park with the energy park behind it. You can see that there are some indicative blocks in the foreground. The pink block is an existing building that we're nearing completion on in terms of construction. We'll complete the construction of that first building by the end of this year. We've then shown an indicative layout of other uses on site: green, which is vertical farming, and blue, which are other uses. We have consent for phase 1, which is shown there, which is for 18,580 square meters, around 200,000 square feet of commercial buildings under construction, all with the direct power feed from the energy park, and with redundancy capabilities in the future from the batteries, the peak lopping plant, and the grid connections. Renewable energy is significantly cheaper than the grid retail pricing, so all of the occupiers there will make significant savings on their energy prices, and in some cases, if they're using enough energy, that saving can equal the annual rent that they'd have to pay for the building. So there are significant savings potentially for occupiers on site. We're looking for occupiers using somewhere between 200 kilowatt hours per square foot to 400 kilowatt hours per square foot. And we're looking for a second phase on site, which will take the total coverage on site up to around 350,000 square feet. We are in very detailed negotiations for a large vertical farm on site, which hopefully over the next few months we'll be able to release more news on. If we could just move on to slide 5, please. So this shows a couple of shots of the pink building that I referred to on the previous plan. And you'll see that we're installing solar panels on the roof. Now, Nick showed a photograph in his presentation of a commercial building with solar on the roof, but you'll have noticed well, you may have noticed that those solar panels were fixed to the actual pitch of the roof. We have developed technologies that allow us to understand the optimum pitch for the panels on site. It isn't the same pitch as the roof. It's an angle of roughly 27%. And the reason for that is that A, it harvests the greatest amount of solar energy at that pitch. And secondly, and more importantly to a degree, the panels become virtually self-cleaning. When they're lying on the pitch of the roof pitch is very, very low, and therefore you'll find that as we do get rain and the dirt that's in that rain dries on the panel, it begins to obscure the panel and reduces the efficiency of the panel on the roof. Clearly, you've got buildings of this size, you've got a lot of panels to clean if you're going to do it that way. So we've studied this, and we have come up with a solution in terms of a specific frame and installation that, as I say, optimizes the angle to make the panel self-cleaning, but also harvest the greatest amount of power. Nick mentioned there's some complexities around the installation, whether it's from new or whether it's retrofitting to buildings. He's probably referring to the commercial leases that these buildings are let on. But we believe that we've now found a solution to that in terms of fitting the frames for the panels as part of the roof infrastructure. Therefore, the roof is built with the frames in place and with the collateral warranties required for them passed on from the roofing contractor. This has led to us applying some of the technologies to third parties. We've been operating on site now for roughly 13 years, and we've collected weather data from the park in 30-minute blocks. We're collecting the data all the time, but we're blocking it into 30-minute blocks. This allows us to model various locations around the UK and predict what the installation of solar panels would do in terms of generation in any particular location. We've signed an exclusive collaboration agreement with a major UK logistics developer to design, engineer and manufacture, install and manage some of the renewable technologies developed at Chelveston into their future logistics developments. A large proportion of these are located within the Arc. Not only will this deliver renewable energy to the occupiers, but depending on the size of the scheme, it has the potential to supply, as we're doing at Chelveston, surrounding developments, including sustainable urban extensions. The battery storage for these larger buildings will either be on a basis of individual, if they're large enough, or communal use. And delivery vehicles, electric delivery vehicles, will form part of the circuit. So if we're building a very large logistics park where there are electric distribution vans on site, for instance, we don't believe that batteries are sustainable currently in lorries. An 40-foot articulated lorry would need around 12 tons of batteries in it to make it useful. So you're starting off with a disadvantage of 12 tons of batteries being carted around the countryside before you start to benefit from the renewable source. So we believe that HGVs will continue down the hydrogen route, but delivery vans, etc., we think will run through the battery solution. And the batteries within the vans, obviously, as they come back to station, could potentially be used as part of the circuit to provide energy for the building. And then during the day, the batteries will get recharged and the energy put back into the vans. So the logistics parks of the future have the potential to be also localized energy generation parks, where the excess energy from these large logistic parks could be used to supply energy to local development, residential developments around them. If we can move on to slide 7, please. This takes us to, just before we go on, that's another view of the solar panels installed on the building that we've got, that we're completing by the end of this year. You can see the neat installation there, and you can see that the panels are not fixed to the roof gradient, but are fixed on these frameworks that we've developed for the site. If we can move on to the next one, please. So the large red line is Chelveston Renewable Energy Park of 750 acres. And to the left of that, in Higham Ferrers, you see a smaller red line around a site that we control, have within the same ownership. And on this site, we've secured planning last year to develop 120 new homes. Gas, as Nick mentioned, will be banned from housing in 2025. All of the houses we've designed, we're going to start this scheme in 2023. So we're potentially 2 years ahead of the government on this initiative. We're going to build all of the houses with individual solar arrays connected to a communal battery. We're not keen on putting batteries in houses because it's a DC current. So our solution is a communal battery. So the houses will be able to store the energy when it's not being used. So when you're out of the house during the day and your solar arrays are generating energy, that energy will be tagged and sent to a communal battery with your details. When you get home at night, you can recover that energy free of charge from the communal battery. We'll have 2 car charging points on site, and when the technology allows, and we're working on the routes to doing this now. The car could become part of the circuit for the house. So you could be in a situation when you've parked your car up, if there's energy in it, then that energy could be used within the house if you need an extra boost. Similarly, at night when you're asleep and you've got extra battery charge in a communal battery, you can transfer this to your car to recharge it. So the car has the ability to become part of the local ring main within your house. We see that there'll be the opportunity for energy generated on site to be transferred to the grid. So there's an opportunity for you to sell the energy you're generating to the grid if there is a period of time when you're over generating. So if we could just go on to the next slide, please. That's a view plan of the housing within the red line. You can see a rough layout of what we're proposing to build there and how it aligns with the existing consent for the SUE expansion of Rushden and Higham Ferries in the future. So we'll hopefully be in a position whereby we can develop out these houses as a very, very first phase to Rushden's SUE, demonstrating how these renewable technologies really can be integrated into the domestic market in a viable and effective way. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So this is just another slide of the energy park at Chelveston. So as I said, Chelveston Renewable Energy and Innovation Park is currently the largest combined renewable energies park in the UK. It has and continues to develop technologies with global partners within similar industries, universities and the FE sectors, demonstrating that commercially viable large-scale renewable energy solutions can and are being integrated into developments now. And as a final note, the energy park at Chelveston currently saves some 35,000 tonnes of carbon a year going into the environment. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Simon. It was really good to get to grips with another really innovative site that we've got locally, and one on a large scale that is obviously strategically important for the rest of the country and shows Northamptonshire again in the spotlight for the right reasons in terms of how we tackle climate change, and it draws on what Nick was talking about earlier in terms of getting energy supplies to houses as we see that shift to different energy forms. Thought it was interesting the points you raised with regard to warehouses, looking at how you get solar panels onto those to make them more sustainable and energy efficient, which is really important, and it'd be good to see how that develops out quickly in the wider area. So thank you for your presentation there. We're going to move on now to a short Q&A session with the speakers from this session. So I'm going to hand over to George Candler, who's going to take us through that.
Thank you, Councillor Pentland. Good morning, everyone. My name is George Candler. I'm Executive Director for Place and Economy here at Northamptonshire Council. And for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm just going to pose a few questions that have come in through our website, both in the lead up to this event, but also this morning as well. So hopefully Chris, Nick and Simon will be ready. In terms of, we've had a few questions actually specifically for Northamptonshire Council, which is understandable. What we will do is we're capturing all of these questions and we will post responses to those specific ones aimed at Northamptonshire Council on our climate webpage, which as a brief reminder is www.northanths.gov.uk/climate. So we'll post those questions and our response to those up on our website after the event. So moving swiftly on, there was quite a discussion around new forms of systems, heating systems, the importance of heat pumps, retrofitting insulation, for example, how we improve our building stock more generally, and we heard that from all three speakers, I think is fair to say. But a question for Chris and for Nick to begin with is, what provisions in further education and vocational training can be made to improve the skills of the future workforce and therefore increase those numbers? And again, I noticed Nick touched on it in the recent funding that Electric Corby have secured, but that's clearly potentially a growth area for Northamptonshire. So would welcome your thoughts on that. And perhaps if I start with Nick and then move on to Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the good news is there's stuff already happening. I think particularly on the construction side, as the construction sector is slowly but is transitioning to new methods of construction, and that is accelerating with government incentive and support to get into modern methods of construction. I think our construction colleges across the area through Tresham have been looking at that. We've had some engagement on the building projects we're doing in Corby with them. I think it's about encouraging that side of things. That's both in terms of new build and building the skill sets that we need for retrofitting, insulation, heat pumps, etc. So I think there's a whole swathe of opportunity, particularly around that construction retrofitting side. But I think beyond that, we've got things like the school in Corby that's specifically focusing on engineering. Again, sorry, I'm referencing Corby just because they're the most recent references I know mentioned, having said with transitioning to electric places. But that I think is an area where if we can focus in and get the schools to focus in on the engineering skills that we need, I think there's a great opportunity for us to both address our local need, but to attract new businesses to the area that will be looking for the sort of people that have got those skills. And so that's sort of a nice dual play with what Simon's saying about bringing the businesses to the area for the energy reasons. We've also got the employment skills locally to support those businesses, and that's a double benefit for us.
Great, thanks, Nick. And Chris?
Just needed to find my unmute button. No, I think, I mean, there are a lot of really exciting things going on at the moment in terms of training, both at school level and also post-school as well. And I think that is where we need to be focusing. It needs to be showing people what opportunities there are. And I think that is at the heart of it all. It's the opportunities. If you think about everything that we're doing in terms of the technology for sort of cleaner fuels, cleaner power to houses and our day-to-day lives. Although people do not like change, if you think about how much change has happened over the last 100 years alone, the first flight in the early 20th century, and how much things have moved on since then. If you think about how we've heated our houses, this is not the first time that we're looking at how we power our houses. If you go back to the 1950s, I mean, the London smogs were infamous, culminating in the Great London Smog in the early 50s. But this also coincided with a change when people were moving away from coal fires in their houses to central heating. And I think this is what we're seeing now, but it's something that requires everyone, not just people at school, not just people who are training, but everyone to realize that there is a better way that's now available. But again, part of it is to make sure it is affordable to all. And what we don't want is to exclude those people who are not able to afford the technology that they need in their households.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. I think it's that leap of faith that I think we need to take in all manner of things, I think, related to this. But certainly that upskilling, I think, is going to be a key part, isn't it, of the future agenda, and perhaps hasn't been given as much focus and emphasis. Quite rightly, it's been more about the impact of climate change, but how we can now adapt and change our workforce so that we can meet demand going forward, I think, is going to be key. I should have said that last question was from a local parish councillor from the Kettering area. Another question, probably aim this one to Simon the you did touch on it, Simon, actually, in your presentation, which is the the ability to capture over or excess electricity that's produced and to store this locally. But those cells in themselves also produce, have a carbon cost. So is there a potential solution to that for example, Chelveston and others are working on?
Yeah, the subtlety of what we're doing is that we're using second life batteries. So we're not buying brand new batteries manufactured for the storage of the electricity. We're using batteries that have been already manufactured and put into cars that have reached the end of their useful life in those cars. So yes, there is a carbon footprint to that battery in that it was manufactured for car use, but we're using that in second life. So we're taking that technology. There's no, to that end, its carbon footprint has ended maybe in the car, and it's transferred to us where we're using it. 80% capacity is still a significant capacity for us in terms of storage. Clearly, you have to think about these batteries in cars. They have a pretty hard life. They're heavy. They're not only moving the car around and not only moving the people around, they're moving themselves around all the time as well. So they have a particularly hard life in a car. But they have a nice retirement slippers and pipe moment when they come to us. They don't have to move around the countryside. They can stay where they are. They're in a controlled temperature environment, which is very important in terms of their performance. They haven't got to sit outside in the winter or outside in the summer. All year round, they're in a controlled environment. And we're still developing the technologies. It's complicated, but we are getting there, and they will provide for large-scale energy storage in the future. I would just like to pick on the housing side again. We get asked, and I'm sure Nick touched on this for the house builders and Chris also. We always get asked by people when we're talking to them as occupiers about how much energy we can produce, how much energy can we offer them, and the question has to be, how much better can you build your houses to use less energy? We shouldn't be asking how much energy we can produce. We should be asking how much energy can you save.
Yeah, no, absolutely echo that point. And I suppose another question that's come in, which again I'll go to Nick first and then maybe back to you, Simon, because it's referenced quite a bit in your presentations around decentralisation, decarbonisation, is in terms of the future needs and the future demands that are clearly going to grow around the shift to electrification, for example, in our homes, in our transport modes. Is the current approach of wind and solar going to be enough to meet those future needs of our local area?
I can answer that one really quickly. Yes, and I can say that with confidence because I had the good fortune to go up to COP, and I was sat with somebody from National Grid, who they have a national line. Is whenever they're asked that question, the answer is yes, they can meet the needs. They have plans in place to meet those demands. I mean, that's a very confident yes, and I think there's obviously caveats to it if you actually dug a bit deeper. But I think in practice, there is the view that wind and solar can, the significant advances in wind offshore particularly, that's really, I think, taken almost everybody by surprise how significant that has been and how it's continuing to accelerate. I think, but the key thing is it's not just about, back to Simon's point, about how much we generate. I think we've got the capacity. It's how much we're more efficient with what we've got and how we use it and how we build things in the future to use it more efficiently. And maybe just again on one of Simon's points earlier, I think he's already doing storage in a different form as well. In the one good way to store energy in an efficient way that's environmentally friendly is to store it as hydrogen. So rather than using battery cells, we don't necessarily need to do that in total. They've still got their role to play, but convert it to hydrogen is a really efficient or really potentially environmentally friendly way to store energy that's being generated at peak times.
Thanks, Nick. Simon, anything you want to add to that?
The answer is yes, the capacity is there. To give you an idea, the renewable energy generated at Chelveston, when we complete the last solar array installation at the end of 2023, will be sufficient to power roughly 24,000 homes. Now, Rushton's SUE is 2,000. So the expansion of Rushton is another 2,000 homes. So that sort of scales it for you. And clearly, we're all looking at local power generation. and replicating schemes like Chelveston across the country. You're going to one thing that's not been mentioned that needs to be mentioned in terms of the delivery of these parks is you need a forward-thinking local authority. Unfortunately, we had one, and it provided us with the means through consent to develop what we've built. And that is an important role for government in terms of encouraging development of these schemes across the country. And yes, not everybody will like the idea of them on their doorstep, but you have to take a brave move. You have to give them consent, and you have to enable them, because they will absolutely be the future for all of us.
Thank you. Absolutely, and I think we all have a role to play, don't we? Central government, local communities, businesses on this particular agenda. Final question. I'll go to each of you in turn. What's one simple, cost-effective action people watching this conference can do to make their contribution to protecting the environment? And I'll start with Chris.
Gosh, where do I start? Something simple that I suppose everyone takes for granted is filling up a kettle. If you look at how much energy is wasted filling up a kettle and boiling water that you don't actually need, that's about £60 million a year that can be saved. So again, energy efficiency, using less energy, only fill your kettle to as much as you actually need to boil.
Thanks, Chris. I'll move on to Simon.
Yeah, so it's a tricky one, a simple thing. Turn the lights off. Even though they're LEDs, they still use power. So yes, you just need to be, it's common sense. Actually, a lot of this is all common sense. You just need to think through what you're doing. The recycling of one thing we didn't mention that we're doing at Chelveston is taking food waste and recycling and generating energy from that. Didn't mention it because it's a different form of renewable energy generation. But it's really important that you stick to the separate bin allocations you get, and don't put renewables into your landfill bins. Make the effort. Make an effort is a good one, actually. Thinking about it, make an effort, even if it's a small effort. It all builds.
Thanks, I'll let you got away with 3 there, but moving on to Nick.
Well, I was gonna say something which I'll build on Simon's comment now, which is essentially, and Chris as well, which is be an engaged consumer. Essentially, just educate yourself around. Don't just assume energy is there when you switch the light on or turn the cooker on. Actually, get engaged about where it's coming from a little bit. Be an informed consumer. You can make better choices, and you can also start to influence where those bigger businesses get their energy from or get their consumables from. So be an engaged consumer, I would say. Fantastic.
Thank you. And just to reassure that we did have other questions. We had questions on biodiversity, which we may be able to weave in the next session, air source heat pumps, and others. But like I say, we'll post those questions and answers onto our website after the event. But for now, I'll hand back to Councillor Pentland.
Thank you, George. And thank you to everybody there for submitting their questions. We'll get through as many as we can as the day progresses, and then provide further answers as well, so that everybody's informed. Thank you for the answers to that, Nick, Chris and Simon. It's really important how we move forward with this, and some of the things you talked about there form part of this, for example, training and making sure people have the skills to do the jobs that we need in relation to this industry. And considering that many of these jobs wouldn't have existed a number of years ago, it's really important that we get there. I thought it was also good to hear about the simple things that we can all be doing at home as individuals. And as you say, Simon, it's important that we do make an effort. And I hope people will be able to take that away. I'm sure people who are watching today are engaged, and I hope that I'm sure they'll be doing things to help our planet as we now as well. So thank you again to everybody for participating in this morning's session. We're going to have a few minutes break before the next session, which will be another really interesting one. I'll try not to say interesting too much more. And hope you'll be able to join us for that. Thank you.